New insight into the second suspect in the Morgan State shooting. The tip sparked from our coverage that led to his arrest and the crimes he was still allegedly committing. Baltimore proposes increased minimum wage for tipped workers. We look at how it's working in D.C. and examine how it could work here. We are in weather alert as cold and rainy conditions continue. Our team is breaking down the impact to your Thanksgiving holiday.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 4.
Fox 45 News is following three big stories right now. Police say the suspect arrested for the Morgan State University shooting has been on the run for months. What we're learning about the moments leading up to Jovan Williams' capture and the role Fox 45's coverage played.
Continuing our investigation into safe streets, we ask Monzi leaders why some of the organization's offices are looking like ghost towns.
And a live look from the Fox 45 Chevy Storm Tracker. We're on weather alert as rain makes for a soggy holiday travel.
And these are the conditions across Maryland right now. We have live cameras in Towson, Baltimore, and of course out on those roads as we continue to track the storm's path. The rain adding some complications to holiday travel plans for Marylanders tonight. Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers will join us in just a few minutes with your holiday travel forecast. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mary Bubala.
And I'm Kai Jackson. We're starting with new information on how investigators tracked down the teen wanted in last month's shooting on Morgan State University's campus.
Alexa Asheville joins us live from the Maryland's Most Wanted set. Alexa, what are investigators saying about this person, Jovan Williams, one of the suspects just named?
Okay, Mary, investigators are calling Jovan Williams a bold criminal after being featured on Maryland's Most Wanted. Investigators say not only they received several tips that not only was he still in D.C., but was continuing to commit violent crimes. Investigators finally tracking down Jovan Williams November 17th after they say he and two other suspects went on a crime spree, committing 2 armed robberies and an armed carjacking in D.C. in less than 2 hours. Williams, 20-year-old Keon Brown, and a 16-year-old all taken into custody, I'm told, after a brief pursuit. Now, in the episode on Maryland's Most Wanted, it was revealed at the time of the mass shooting on MSU's campus, Williams was already wanted for his alleged role in a federal drug trafficking case. Back in June of this year, officials in D.C. announced the takedown of the operation and detailed the defendants were members of the notorious gang, the Kennedy Street Crew. Police unable to track down Williams before investigators say he and a juvenile, a 17-year-old, opened fire on MSU's campus, shooting 5 people, 4 of them students, in early October. Now, one of the other 2 suspects arrested alongside Williams was also named in the federal indictment. More on that at 5. Alexa Ashwell, Fox 45 News.
Thank you, Alexa. The first suspect arrested in the MSU shooting is just 17 years old. Shortly after that arrest last month, Fox 45 News pressed Mayor Brandon Scott on juvenile crime in Baltimore. The mayor criticized the Department of Juvenile Services, calling it a broken system.
We have to build a juvenile justice system that works from the ground up. Every single portion of it has to be looked at. I've been talking about that for years now, as you know.
Well, that was more than a month ago. Since that time, the mayor hasn't specified what changes he wants to see.
Fox 45 News was live at Morgan State University for nearly 5 hours on the night of the shooting. We will continue to bring you updates in this investigation, and you can find all of our reporting on this shooting at foxbaltimore.com.
We have breaking news to report. A federal appeals court rules a Maryland handgun law is unconstitutional. That law in question requires Marylanders to get a handgun qualification license before buying a gun. In order to get that license, residents must submit fingerprints as part of a background check, as well as take a handgun safety course. The court says those requirements unfairly restrict law-abiding citizens' access to guns. Senate President Bill Ferguson says that decision is ridiculous. Ferguson says every responsible gun owner supports basic firearm training and keeping guns out of criminals' hands. This decision will unequivocally lead to more gun violence and firearm-related deaths.
The ruling comes as the state is facing another legal challenge to one of its gun control laws, SB 1. The policy significantly restricts where legal gun owners can carry their weapons. The state making it illegal to carry guns in healthcare facilities, schools, stadiums, places with license to sell alcohol, and government buildings. As soon as the governor signed the bill into law, the NRA filed a lawsuit challenging its constitutionality. 2 people are hurt after a shooting in West Baltimore. Police responded to the corner of North Monroe Street and Walbrook Avenue just after 8:45 last night. A 33-year-old and a 50-year-old man had been shot. Anybody with information asked to call police or Metro Crime Stoppers.
Mayoral candidate Sheila Dixon was set to speak at Maceo's last night, a local business around the corner where that shooting happened. On Twitter, she addressed the violence, calling it heartbreaking, and says the city has to do better.
And today, the violence continued. A 61-year-old man shot in East Baltimore this afternoon. Happened just before 9 in the, actually near a gas station. The victim has been taken to the hospital. His condition right now is unclear. Anybody with information should contact Baltimore police.
According to city police, 575 people have been shot and survived this year. 237 people have been killed. Those numbers are down from last year, and the city is on pace to see 2023 with fewer than 300 people killed. The mayor says his policies are responsible for the drop in gun violence, but the violent crime reduction coincides with the partnership between City State's Attorney Ivan Bates and U.S. Attorney for Maryland Eric Barron, who promised tougher on-crime approaches in the city. Now, since that partnership began, homicides are down 20% and non-fatal shootings are down 9%. When we questioned the mayor on the trend, he doubled down, saying he's the one responsible for the decline.
I love them both dearly. Their cases are made by police officers that work for Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore City. We direct. The arrests are done by us. All the enforcement is done by us.
The mayor, smart politically, will take credit for this stuff because when you're running for re-election and numbers are going down, you want to hang a star on it.
If current crime trends hold, Baltimore, again, as we mentioned, will see the year finish with fewer than 300 people killed for the first time in 9 years.
As the federal investigation involving Safe Streets employees continues, Fox 45 News remains committed to digging into the violence intervention effort. Mackenzie Frost questioning city leaders about events held by Safe Streets and when there will be more transparency provided to the public.
On social media, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement promoting several Safe Streets events, including this expungement clinic held here at the Belvedere Safe Streets location off Park Heights Avenue. The flyer says the event lasting from 3 to 6 in the afternoon. But when Fox 45's photographer showed up around 4:30, the door was locked. Monzi completely ignoring our questions about the event. The apparent lack of event, despite being advertised, isn't the only thing we've reached out to Monzi asking questions about. The city's online map showing where the Safe Street zones are and each location. The map lists the Franklin Square location at 5 North Calhoun Street. So we went to that spot. We found a building seemingly under construction. No signs of Safe Streets. Monzi again ignoring our questions about the location of this site. And that brings us here to the whiteboards. We know the feds are investigating at least one Safe Streets location and at least one employee. We know we've been sending several questions to the mayor and his administration asking things like, will you release the names of the Safe Streets workers? Mayor Brandon Scott often says no. Will you launch an investigation into all the Safe Streets sites? Again, the mayor says the current federal investigation is isolated to just one location and one employee right now. So he says more investigations aren't necessary. So now we have some new questions for the mayor and for Monzi about the Safe Streets program. According to the contracts the city has with the 2 nonprofits, those organizations are supposed to cover the cost for the background checks for Safe Streets employees. But we have documentation showing that the nonprofits are seeking reimbursement from the city for those background checks. So we want to know who's actually responsible for covering the cost of the background checks for the Safe Streets employees. And that raises questions about an audit. Some members of the city's audit commission have told us that they support an audit of Monzi. And we asked Mayor Brandon Scott about it recently. Here's what he said.
Talk to the comptroller. We're open for any audit and we'll be working with him first because that is what the people of Baltimore have voted by charter to have the city comptroller of Baltimore City duly elected by the residents to do that job. And we know he's a fabulous comptroller and he'll do that.
So if the state auditors were to say they wanted to do it, would you support that?
I just answered that question. City first, and then if the state wants to step in and do that, they can have at it. We're not hiding anything, and we know that the organizations that we work with, LifeBridge and others, who have audits of their own, They're not hiding anything either.
So as we continue to dig into the inner workings of the Safe Streets program, we need help from you. If you have any information about this program that you think I need to know about, send it to me directly. safestreetstips@gmail.com. Meanwhile, we'll continue to demand answers from Mayor Brandon Scott and his administration about the Safe Streets program. At the Accountability Desk, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
And that brings us to our question of the day. Do you think Safe Streets needs to be paused until we learn more about the organization? We just opened this poll. To make your voice heard, head to foxbaltimore.com.
We remain under weather alert now this afternoon for lots and lots of rain. I know I had a big snarl of a commute into work today all through downtown. I know 95 tunnel was closed northbound for a time. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but really just a disaster downtown with a lot of diverted traffic. Saw a Jeep spun around getting onto 83 downtown. So you really have to take it slow. Roads are very slippery and there's a lot of folks on the roads too in this mess. You see the yellow all the way from Mount Airy to Eldersburg down to Olney, Dayton, and then you go north of Westminster. There's some very heavy rain as well. We'll zoom out a little bit more. Really, the whole state is fully covered in rain. There's even a little bit of ice as you work into the highest elevations north and west of Cumberland, into the panhandle of West Virginia as well. And this as the latest weather maker continues to rip on through central Maryland. And this will continue all the way through the remainder of the afternoon and into the evening. 5 p.m. temperature at 53, 53 at 7, 54 at 9. It's all rain, but rain heavy at times. We're going to be tracking all of that on the Future Scan computer model and let you know how things look for the busiest travel day of the year tomorrow. That's coming up in my Weather Authority forecast.
Jonathan, thank you. Taking a look at the FlightAware Misery Map. I love that name. The rain having some impact on flights at BWI. 122 planes have been delayed at the airport, with one flight getting canceled. We'll continue to track the storm's impact as the rain picks up later tonight.
Put the power of the Weather Authority Storm Center in your hands. Download the free WBFF Weather Authority app for your smartphone. Use our powerful Doppler radar to follow storms to your street. Go to your app store and search WBFF to get started. A hostage release deal could be worked out between Israel and Hamas at any moment. The White House and Israeli officials say they're making progress towards getting more than 220 hostages held by Hamas home. That deal would likely involve Hamas surrendering 50 women and children in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners being held in Israel, but right now nothing is official. We'll track the negotiations on air and online at foxbaltimore.com.
Millions of dollars on travel, conferences, and more. What Project Baltimore is uncovering about the state's largest teachers union.
Has a higher minimum wage hurt D.C. businesses and their employees? We take a closer look at a policy similar to one being considered by the Baltimore City Council.
How much is the city spending on free services? Taking a closer look at how your tax dollars are being spent.
Fox 45 News, winner of 16 2022 Regional Emmy Awards, more than all other Baltimore news stations combined.
New tonight, as Baltimore City struggles to balance its budget, more financial assistance programs are being offered than ever before. Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor has more on how the city's spending will eventually cost you.
What's free for a select few likely isn't free for you. Baltimore City's current administration rolling out a slew of new assistance programs promoted as offering financial aid to those in need. The new programs ranging from basic essentials, including rent, water, gas, and electric, to internet service subsidies and free name brand shoes.
Just because a program is helping someone doesn't mean money isn't being wasted. There still should be transparency and oversight to make sure that the money is being spent wisely.
A Fox 45 investigation revealing Mayor Brandon Scott's Safe Streets program spending thousands of dollars on sneakers this year, sparking calls for an audit of the agency's finances.
There are obviously questionable items on the list that taxpayers shouldn't be paying for. They shouldn't be paying for sneakers. That's an easy one to get rid of.
But by far the most expensive and controversial program, Mayor Scott's Baltimore Young Family Success Fund, selecting 200 young parents to receive unconditional cash payments of $1,000 every month for 2 straight years.
There have been mixed results about this kind of program across the country.
According to taxpayer advocate David Williams, many of the programs are difficult to monitor and the results are even harder to measure.
A, it's really difficult to track the money and where the families are spending the money. And B, there's really no consistent track record of these programs working for people.
With so many new fiscal breaks being introduced, in just 1 year, a massive bill is built.
This affects taxpayers at a very deep level, especially considering that the city just announced that they may have a $100 million structural deficit starting next year.
Costs taxpayers will be asked to foot as the city struggles to balance its budget. Rebecca Pryor.
That's why every single expenditure needs to be scrutinized.
Fox 45 News.
Taking a live look at our Chevy Storm Tracker driving along 695 near Towson, stuck in some traffic, of course, because we are near rush hour and holiday travel. We are also looking at our weather radar right there up on the upper right and the inner harbor, which you really can't see. Of course, we're on weather alert today. We've been dealing with this steady rain all day. It's only expected to get heavier as the night goes on. Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers here now with the latest on how it's impacting everybody's holiday travel as they're starting to leave town.
I'll tell you, coming into work, I'm coming in from the south, from Anne Arundel County, probably one of the worst commutes I've ever dealt with getting into work. It took me about double the amount of time.
Even with
to
like
get here.
Snow days?
Yeah, snow days, at least, you know, there's no one on the road usually. Here,
That's
it was
true.
just traffic jam after traffic jam. 95 was closed for a time. I'm not sure if that's still going on, but I know that the tunnel on 95 was closed going northbound, and everyone was diverting downtown. So really just an absolute mess. Even a light downtown, a traffic signal was out there right downtown, Pratt Street. So just a big mess today, big mess this afternoon. Westminster down to Eldersburg, back to Randallstown. Heavy rain coming down, a soaker here in Baltimore. And that all leads to disaster if you add in not only folks getting off of work early likely today because it's a Tuesday before Thanksgiving, but also folks trying to get to wherever they're going, maybe getting a jump start on the holiday travel. Big mess here in Baltimore, up and down 95, Bel Air, Edgewood. The rain lightens up a little bit toward Elkton, but still a soaker all the way down to Denton and Easton, and it begins getting heavy as you head into Anne Arundel County, Severn, Columbia, Laurel. Back down to the district, looking like just an absolute mess. And then you move westbound, and there's still more rain, even mixed potentially if you're headed out Pittsburgh way as you're getting over the mountains with some ice as you head through Cumberland, especially west of Cumberland, north into western Pennsylvania, the panhandle of West Virginia. The radar really not looking pretty this afternoon, and really for most folks around here, it is a cold soaking rain. You get far enough north, if you're driving up toward New York State, there's snow and there's ice all the way into western New England, even some winter weather advisories up that way. Heavy rain blasting in from the south. Here's our latest weather maker. Thankfully, we're on the relatively warmer side of it, so it's all liquid. Dries out behind it, and that's just in time for travels into tomorrow. You take a look at 695. Looks pretty wet here. 51 degrees. Rain coming down. This is in Towson, right near York Road. We've just got, again, a slathering of rain for the rest of this afternoon's commute into this evening at 6:30 p.m. It gets worse before it gets better, at least rain-wise. A wind-driven rain at 8:15 p.m. Look at this. Could even have a rumble of thunder in here by about 11:45. That then moves east, and by about 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, all the rain ends. So for tomorrow, the busiest travel day of the year, not bad, a little bit breezy, but high temperature is going to be near 60 after the solid 1 to maybe 3 inches of rain that we get for the remainder of today into tonight in total. Tomorrow, breezy again. That chance of a shower you see there, that should be probably, I'd say, pre-dawn hours. Thanksgiving itself looking great. A little breeze, 57. Good-looking days Friday, Saturday, but a cooling trend all the way into Sunday for all that shopping at the mall. Could see a shower or two Monday, and sunshine should return by next Tuesday.
Jonathan, thank you. Would raising the minimum wage for servers be too expensive for restaurants in Baltimore? Looking at the impact a similar policy has had in D.C.
The presidential debate calendar has been set, but will the nominees even take part? I'm Scott Thuman in Washington with the debate over debates coming up.
If it seems the presidential debates are disappearing, you are not wrong. There have been none for Democrats this primary process, and Republicans seem poised to possibly skip the debates for the general election next fall. Why and what does it all mean for you, the voter? Sinclair's chief political correspondent Scott Thuman explains.
Could those on-stage stare-downs between presidential contenders be scrapped in the near future? This week, the schedule for 3 general election debates between the eventual nominees was set, though it's unclear if they'll actually happen.
Will the president participate in it?
I would refer to the campaign on that particular question.
While that's for the general election, President Biden already balked at the idea of primary debates, choosing to all-out ignore Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr., who, partially for that reason, switched from a Democrat to an independent. And the Republican Party is boycotting the general election showdowns sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates, claiming unfair treatment in the past. And Donald Trump has yet to debate his Republican primary competitors.
He owes it to you to be on this stage and explain why he should get another chance.
The debate over debates intensifying as Trump and supporters pressure the GOP to stop the primary ones altogether, calling them a waste of time.
He feels, as the former president, he shouldn't have to be on the debate stage, that he's going to earn the nomination a different way.
Presidential debates have taken place every election cycle since 1976, and in recent years, as many as 2/3 of Americans have said they've been helpful in making up their minds. And they've had critical impact dating back to 1960.
The candidates need no introduction.
When a more polished and camera-ready makeup-wearing John F. Kennedy squared off with a sweating Richard Nixon, who in turn lost that election. But as they rely instead on the bully pulpit, podcasts, or carefully curated TV appearances, those vying for your vote seem less interested in facing their opponents head-on and possibly leaving the podiums without an eventual president behind them. In Washington, I'm Scott Thuman.
U.S. and Israeli leaders say a deal could come any minute now, the latest on the effort to recover hostages from Hamas. Project Baltimore uncovering how Maryland's largest teachers union spending millions of dollars, and it's not on students, where the money is going and why some say it's being misused. How has a higher minimum wage changed D.C. restaurants? Taking a look at the impact there as Baltimore considers a new policy.
The battle over money for tipped workers in restaurants is expected to be waged in Baltimore. Washington, D.C. is 6 months into its own changes to the restaurant industry, also known as Initiative 82.
And so far, there are conflicting views on its impact.
We won this both in Washington, D.C. a year ago, and we just won it in Chicago last month. And that is creating momentum for workers who are saying, we want this in Maryland.
The tipping system works well for them. The current model is not broken. Don't try and fix it. And especially now, don't try and fix it and take us down the path of what's happening in Washington, D.C., where restaurants are moving away from tips to these mandatory service charges that the guests don't like and the workers don't like either.
Well, tonight, Fox 45's Amy Simpson is digging into the changes to D.C.'s restaurant culture as we wait to see what this debate will look like here in Baltimore City. Amy?
Yes, Mary, some say it's too early to really tell the impact of these changes on Washington, D.C.'s service industry. Others, however, quick to call it a disaster. In Washington, D.C., it's been 6 months of Initiative 82, part of a nationwide movement to raise the minimum wage for tipped restaurant workers. But the jury's out on how it's going.
In places where it has happened, like in D.C., it's been something of a disaster.
Anybody who eats out in D.C. knows that the D.C. restaurant industry is booming right now. It is very busy.
This report released earlier this month by One Fair Wage, saying it's too early to conduct a full analysis of Initiative 82. But president of this special interest organization claims wages are up and restaurants are thriving since the measure passed.
The opposition is going to say that, things have failed and everything is horrible. The data shows the opposite. So we are not claiming that because of I-82, wages have gone up, tips have gone up, but we are saying the data is very clear that the industry has not failed.
Meanwhile, the Employment Policies Institute claims Initiative 82 is changing the customer experience. Some restaurants opting to raise menu prices.
Customers don't want to pay $40 for a roast chicken or, $25 for a cheeseburger. And so instead, what the restaurants do is they say, instead of doing tips now, we'll add a mandatory 20% service charge onto the bill at the end of the meal.
And in turn, having an impact on the money servers are taking home.
Whereas the tip goes entirely to the worker, the service charge can be kept by the restaurant. And so maybe the worker seeds half of it.
The Restaurant Association of Maryland also against the movement, pointing to its views on the impact in Washington, D.C.
It has become abundantly clear in Washington, D.C. that people are dining out less, they are tipping less, some are not tipping at all, and servers are taking a significant reduction in earnings than what they are used to prior to the elimination of tip credit.
Now, One Fair Wage is involved in efforts to change the pay model for restaurants in Baltimore City. This online event indicates the group will be at City Hall December 6th, rallying for the cause, looking to raise pay for tipped workers.
There's supposedly going to be a bill introduction on the 6th, but it hasn't been finalized yet.
But City Council's agenda for December 6th has yet to reflect a bill proposal on the issue. Similar efforts in Montgomery and Prince George's counties met with strong opposition from servers and bartenders looking to keep the status quo. And right now, the rate for tipped workers in Maryland is $3.63 an hour. The state's minimum wage is set to rise to $15 an hour come January 1st. Reporting live tonight, Amy Simpson, Fox 45 News.
All right, Amy, thank you. Let's continue this debate. That debate over tipping versus a higher minimum wage has been going on for years, as a matter of fact. So let's take a look at some of the opinions that we're seeing online. These coming obviously from X. American tipping culture, it is not a customer's responsibility for the employee to get a living wage. All right, that's one opinion here. Is it the larger issue that servers, when asked if they would like a higher minimum wage versus tips, routinely choose tips? How about this one? A lot of discussion about a minimum wage versus tipping. Why can't you have them both? That's an interesting perspective there. And how about this one here? American tipping culture and the waiters, waitresses don't even get a minimum wage. This country is a bit wonky. And there's one more in here I want you to read here right where it works. Here we go. Never understood the tipping obligation in U.S. culture. I'm not paying for the food as if I'm buying groceries. I'm paying very expensively to include the service. Those are some of the opinions coming in right now. Mary?
Well, tonight, more eye-opening findings coming out of Project Baltimore's investigation into how Maryland's largest teachers union is spending its money that typically starts as your tax dollars. Chris Papps has found the Maryland State Education Association has spent millions of dollars in recent years on just one thing.
For years, we have heard the same message. from many public officials.
We made the largest investment in public education by any governor in our state's history.
That Maryland public schools need more money.
To help empower educators have the resources they need to focus on learning and student success.
But a Project Baltimore investigation found, while many say schools don't have enough money, the state's largest teachers union seems to have plenty. According to its federal nonprofit filings last year, the Maryland State Education Association spent $509,000 just on travel expenses. And that amount does not include conferences, conventions, and meetings, which was another $35,000.
There is no justification to spend $500,000 a year on travel. The receipts need to be provided.
David Williams is with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance.
And this money is going to the unions. It's not ultimately getting to the kids. And the stated purpose of the union is to help the children.
In the last 10 years, the union has spent a lot on travel. In fact, $509,000 is on the low end. In 2013, the union spent $543,000 on travel expenses. By 2016, that number topped $1.1 million on just traveling in 2016. During the COVID years, the numbers did come down, but the union still managed to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on travel as schools were shut down. In all, over the last decade, the union spent nearly $6.5 million on travel expenses. That comes out to an average of more than $53,000 a month, every month, for 10 straight years. How does that fulfill the union's tax-exempt mission to elevate the quality of education for students? All of that travel is in addition to what Project Baltimore has been reporting over the past week, that MSEA revenues and assets have hit record levels. At least 11 union employees made more than $200,000 last year in compensation. And this is happening as test scores in our state are steadily declining.
Teachers are always complaining that they don't have enough supplies. The union could take millions of dollars that they have and buy supplies for the teachers to make the kids have a better educational experience. The unions are failing the kids, they're failing the state.
Maryland's legislature in 2021 passed the largest education spending increase in state history. The blueprint for Maryland's future had strong support from the teachers union. Union President Cheryl Bost was even appointed to the Blueprint's Accountability and Implementation Board.
Provide more for our students, more career technology education, teacher salaries, support for those students who are living in concentrated poverty.
The Blueprint pumps billions of additional tax dollars into public education, but many county leaders are saying they can't afford to pay for it.
Yeah.
Harford County Executive Bob Casserly told Fox 45, unless the law is revised, either taxes will have to go up or other services will be cut.
It threatens to really derail our county's finances.
And as many local counties say, they don't have enough money to implement the plan. The teachers union is spending on average $53,000 a month on travel, while amassing a record-setting $45 million in assets.
Let's face it, these travel expenses, they're just a drop in the bucket. They just sort of epitomize what that this union structure has always been about, this union structure, not about teachers, not about students, not about the quality of education.
Project Baltimore, over the past few weeks, has repeatedly reached out to the union and its top officials. We have specifically asked how spending millions of dollars on travel helps students, but the union appears to be ignoring us. We have not received any reply, but we'll keep trying. I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
Now to the latest on the war in Israel. President Biden says a hostage deal with Hamas is coming.
We're now very close, very close. could bring some of these hostages home very soon. But I don't want to get into the details of things because nothing is done until it's done.
Well, some reports say that deal could be centered around the release of 50 women and children being held by Hamas. In exchange, Israel would free roughly 150 Palestinian prisoners. The deal could also include Israel's suspending of its drone flights for up to 6 hours per day and a multiple-day pause in the fighting to facilitate a prisoner exchange.
And if these reports are accurate, the deal could still leave more than 150 hostages in Hamas's custody. These details also subject to change as official agreement has not been announced.
Well, last week, Israeli officials reported finding the bodies of 2 hostages taken by Hamas, one of them a 19-year-old Israeli soldier, the other a 65-year-old civilian. Tonight, new signs of direct links between the violence in the Middle East and growing threats here at home. Here's national correspondent Christine Frizzell.
The group Students for Justice in Palestine more vocal than ever at universities nationwide. But some now accuse them of supporting Hamas and terrorism. A bipartisan group of New York lawmakers asking Governor Kathy Hochul to shut down the group at area universities. In a letter writing, SJPs across the state have released statements that endorse attacks on civilians, arguing their rallies include chants from the Hamas charter, calling for the death and annihilation of Jews and Israel. Some chapters already suspended elsewhere. At a time, the Department of Education has launched an investigation into 7 schools for alleged incidents of anti-Semitism, which have skyrocketed since the October 7th Hamas-led attack in Israel and the weeks of bombing by Israel that have followed in Gaza.
Colleges should be places where students could express themselves, and it's okay to have different beliefs. And it's okay to express those different beliefs. But when it becomes a threat to students, or when students can't feel safe walking from their dorm to their classroom because they're afraid that they're going to get harmed, that's unacceptable.
A professor at Wake Forest University resigning after backlash from this post on X, appearing to sympathize with the October 7th attack, writing, "So it's kind of a duh, but if you turn me out of my house and confine what's left of my family to the small, impoverished state you run as an open-air prison, I could be tempted to shoot up your dance party." There are also new alarm bells in New York, following a brand new threat assessment by the New York State Intelligence Center of increased threats of a terror attack. Governor Hochul announcing new actions and $3 million in new funding to beef up staffing. But she's also demanding social media companies take action.
And as the steward of the 21st century public square, TikTok and other social media companies, they must start to regulate vile hate speech that originates on their platforms.
All of these warnings come as the FBI says it had already been operating on high alert before the war in the Middle East, with threats surging ever since. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzell.
We'll follow developments on the hostage deal as we learn more. See our full coverage on the war in Israel. You can head to foxbaltimore.com.
I'm Angela Brown in Washington, D.C. An update on the new 988 crisis and suicide lifeline and why some people are not calling back.
And travel for tomorrow and Thanksgiving a whole heck of a lot better than today. Temperatures could even breach 60 degrees tomorrow and a nice day for Thanksgiving. But how about the rest of today? We're tracking rain on the radar, and I'm going to let you know what it looks like for getting home. That's coming up in my Weather Authority forecast.
988, the suicide crisis lifeline, is now over a year old. Millions of people in crisis are calling that number, but a new report says it might not be working as well as it could be. The National Desk, Angela Brown, explains.
988 is the only lifeline for mental health for many Americans.
In rural counties where there's no nearby doctor, this is where people receive their mental health treatment.
Dr. Tia Dole is the Chief 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline Officer at Vibrant Emotional Health. On Vibrant's website, this number: 2,500,000 people offered life-changing or life-saving services.
About 13% of the people who reach out to us are actively suicidal.
988 calls routed into call centers like this one in Texas.
I think everybody needs support. There's a lot going on. People are feeling overwhelmed, and this gives them a safe space to be able to tell people, I'm not okay right now and I need support.
But a new report says some people in crisis calling for help may not call back.
It was a very small number of people who said that they wouldn't call back. However, I don't like to dismiss small numbers.
This new report found in JAMA found among 23 respondents with serious distress who had used the 988 lifeline, only 7 were very likely to use it in the future. Dr. Dole is working to find out why.
So for me, it's really about understanding why people wouldn't call back. Is it because it wasn't helpful? Is it because I didn't like the person I was speaking to? Is it because I didn't receive the number of resources?
Right now, they're doing post-call surveys to find out why people may not call back. But Dr. Dole says there's another major problem. People have never heard of 988. A new survey found that 80% of people had never heard of 988 or were not familiar. Reporting in Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
Take a live look outside as thousands hit the road for Thanksgiving. We're seeing rain. On the left, a live look at our FOX45 Chevy Storm Tracker, still stuck on traffic near Towson. And on the right side of your screen, our weather radar, along with a look at traffic north of Baltimore. Here's Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers.
Yeah, you can see those trails of headlights there, and you are not alone if you're on the roads this afternoon. Probably actually best if you can wait to make those travels to do it tomorrow. I know I drove into work from Anne Arundel County. It took me about double the amount of time that it usually takes me to get here. So you really got to be careful. Take it slow. I saw cars spun out on some entrance ramps onto 83. So keep in mind, those roads are very slippery, hazardous, and slick, and there are a lot of cars and not a lot of room for error out there this afternoon. Cockeysville down to Baltimore, Washington, D.C., as well as Annapolis. Lots of rain all the way back to the 81 corridor, up and down the 95 corridor. There's even some snow and ice in this area in purple that's up here right around Cumberland. So keep in mind, if you are going to be maybe making some travels out towards, say, Pittsburgh, and you're taking the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you may encounter some icy conditions on some of the secondary roads. Could be kind of rough there. Right now, a little break in some of the heaviest activity here in Baltimore, but it's still raining. And there's more that's out to the west, more heavy rain that's out toward Green Valley, as well as Frederick, Gaithersburg. This is going to up and move its way toward us into the remainder of tonight. Probably not going to stop raining until well after midnight, till we finally get this system of fronts through. That's going to be the next weather maker rolling in and rolling through us, and that will bring in the dry air in time for, that's right, tomorrow. Look, Wednesday, much better days. All this mess moves off the coast and away. Fair weather high pressure sets up, and it'll stay for pretty much the entire weekend. Here in Baltimore right now, Toyota East Inner Harbor Skycam, not pretty at all. Winds out of the east at 16, goes right through you. 52 degrees, a good cold rain coming down. All the way through about 6:30, 7 o'clock tonight. There's heavy rain moving back in from the west. Could even have a lightning strike. Wouldn't be totally surprised here by about 11:45 p.m. as this band of heavy rain rolls through. By about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, that moves east of Baltimore and then eventually off the eastern shore. And some sunshine returning for travels tomorrow. Looking a lot better for one of the, again, busiest travel days of the year coming for tomorrow. On Wednesday, prior to Thanksgiving, a solid 1 to 3 inches of rain out of this. We need the rain. The timing is just not very good. 62 tomorrow. That early showers mainly pre-dawn hours. Thanksgiving looking great. Rest of the weekend looking pretty good, too, for shopping. Could see a couple of showers on Monday. Tuesday, dry sunshine back. And by the way, also with some southerly winds kicking in into this evening, we've got coastal flood warnings out for southern Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Anne Arundel County. Potentially some moderate coastal flooding. We might have some sandbagging going on at Fells Point as well as down at Annapolis.
Coming up at 5 o'clock, younger Americans are putting off home ownership while newer generations are saying no thank you. And is it okay to switch seats? Who gets the armrest? And what's the worst thing you can do on a flight? We break down airline etiquette coming up. You know, it's no secret that air travel can test your patience, but as unpleasant as it can be, following some basic common sense rules can lessen that stress, especially over the holidays. Tom Rogers unpacks the do's and don'ts of flying.
Flight delays, long security checks, and jam-packed planes make it flying difficult enough. And then add in rude, inconsiderate passengers, and it's a recipe for disaster.
They should behave the same way they did visit somebody's home.
But being courteous can mean different things to different people.
One time I did see someone giving themselves a manicure, and that was a little too far for me.
To clear the air, Consumer Reports consulted with flight attendants and etiquette experts to come up with the essential guide of unspoken rules. To begin, middle seat passengers should have access to both armrests.
It's the only real estate they own, so let them get the consolation prize.
What about reclining? You certainly have the right to, but before you do,
make sure you're not unduly inconveniencing the person behind you who may be tall. You can also politely ask them if it's okay if you recline.
Airline staff also says, remember that you are sharing a confined space with others, and that means do not hoard the overhead bins. Wear your headphones when you're using your devices. Avoid unpacking anything smelly like some pungent food, meaning no tuna or egg salad sandwiches. And they beg, definitely keep your shoes on.
Mistakes.
What if a person wants to switch seats, or if someone is kicking your chair?
It's okay to ask them politely to stop. And it's also okay to say no to switching a seat, especially if there's a reason you chose it, like it's a window and you want to sleep. But be flexible if you're being asked for an even trade, like an aisle seat for your aisle seat, just one row back.
Above all,
it doesn't do any good to get upset or angry, and the more relaxed you are, the better your flight's going to be.
A good rule for many situations in the air and on the ground. Now, if disruptions do occur, someone gets angry or aggressive, Consumer Reports says it's best not to take matters into your own hands. Tell a flight attendant who is trained to handle those kinds of situations. Tom Rogers, Fox 45 News.
Coming up on Fox 45 News at 5 o'clock, a new court ruling when it comes to how Maryland residents buy guns. Why some argue it is the wrong move. Plus, inching closer to a deal to release hostages in Israel, family members of those missing voice their frustration.
The Morgan State University mass shooting suspect captured. I'm Alexa Ashwell. The tip that led to the arrest of Javon Williams and the crimes investigators say he was still committing.
New questions about a Safe Streets events and their locations. I'm Mackenzie Frost at the Accountability Desk. We'll walk you through what we're learning from City Hall.
And lots of rain coming down. We're under weather alert through the afternoon commute for the potential of some rough travel. I'll let you know how long it's going to stay treacherous and how Thanksgiving shapes up in my Weather Authority forecast.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 5.
And let's take a live look across the state tonight as we are under weather alert. As Jonathan told us, heavy rain makes its way across our area just in time for thousands to take the roads and skies for holiday travel. The heaviest rain is expected, though, to move through tonight into early tomorrow morning, bringing some areas more than 2 inches of rain. Thank you for staying with us. I'm Kai Jackson.
And I'm Mary Bubala. Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Meyer standing by with our holiday forecast and what you need to be on the lookout if you're hitting the roads and skies this week.
But we begin with the city in crisis. Fox 45 News uncovers new information about the latest suspect arrested in connection to the Morgan State University shooting last month. 18-year-old Javon Williams was arrested Friday, and now we're learning about his troubled past. Fox 45's Alexa Ashwell is live with new developments and how our coverage played a part in that capture. Alexa.
Yes, Kai, after being featured on Maryland's Most Wanted, investigators say they received several tips concerning Jovan Williams and his whereabouts. And those tips revealed not only was he still in D.C., but they say he was continuing to commit violent crimes. The search for Morgan State University mass shooting suspect Jovan Williams now over. Investigators say after appearing on Maryland's Most Wanted, police received tips Williams, a known member of the notorious D.C. gang, the Kennedy Street Crew, was still in the area and committing armed robberies and carjackings. Investigators finally tracking down Williams November 17th after they say he and two other suspects went on a crime spree in D.C. Williams, 20-year-old Keon Brown, and a 16-year-old were all taken into custody after a brief pursuit. Investigators believe he's a member of the Kennedy Street Crew, and at the time of the Morgan State University mass shooting was already facing federal charges related to the gang's alleged drug trafficking operation. In last month's episode on Maryland's Most Wanted, it was revealed at the time of the mass shooting on MSU's campus, Williams was already wanted for his alleged role in a federal drug trafficking case. Back in June of this year, officials in D.C. announced the takedown of the operation and detailed the defendants were members of the gang Kennedy Street Crew. Williams and some of the others listed still at large.
It is not just the danger of the drugs being peddled, it is also the money and firearms associated with these drug operations. They combine to form a toxic mix for fueling violence.
Police unable to track down Williams before investigators say he and a 17-year-old opened fire on MSU's campus, shooting 5 people, including 4 students, in early October. Now we're learning one of the suspects arrested alongside Williams, 20-year-old Keon Brown, is also listed in this federal drug trafficking indictment. In the indictment, investigators detail between 2019 and 2023, the Kennedy Street Crew sold marijuana, fentanyl, and crack, used firearms to protect territory and contraband, and concealed their proceeds using shell businesses and other methods of laundering. A copy of a search warrant executed back in January of this year shows Williams and Brown as 2 of the 9 people charged after agents found the group in a home in D.C. with nearly a dozen firearms. 2 members now finally off the streets. So why did it take so long to track down Williams? That's a question I asked. That indictment back in June, the mass shooting on Morgan State University's campus happening nearly 4 months later in October. Investigators stress because of his gang affiliation, he was likely receiving help, and that made it difficult to track him down. Again, now Williams in custody. Alexa Ashwell, Fox 45 News.
Well, shortly after the 17-year-old's arrest last month, Fox 45 News pressed Mayor Scott on juvenile crime in Baltimore. The mayor criticized the Department of Juvenile Services, calling it a broken system.
We have to build a juvenile justice system that works from the ground up. Every single portion of it has to be looked at. I've been talking about that for years now, as you know.
Well, that was more than a month ago. Since then, the mayor hasn't specified what changes he wants to see. Fox 45 News was live at Morgan State University for nearly 5 hours on that night of the shooting. We'll continue to bring you updates on this investigation. You can find all of our reporting on the shooting at foxbaltimore.com.
2 people are hurt after a shooting in West Baltimore. Police responded to the corner of North Monroe Street and Walbrook Avenue around 8:45. A 33-year-old and 50-year-old had been shot. Anyone with information is asked to call city police or Metro Crime Stoppers.
Mayoral candidate Sheila Dixon was set to speak at Maceo's last night, a local business right on the corner where the shooting happened. On Twitter, she addressed the violence, calling it heartbreaking, and says the city has to do better.
Now, when it comes to homicides in Baltimore, Mayor Brandon Scott is touting this year's drop in murders and responding to the claims that the reduction can be attributed to the partnership between City State's Attorney Ivan Bates and U.S. Attorney for Maryland Eric Barron.
I love them both dearly. Their cases are made by police officers that work for Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore City. We direct. The arrests are done by us. All the enforcement is done by us.
Well, since that partnership began, homicides are down 20% and non-fatal shootings are down 9%. But law enforcement expert Maury Richards says Mayor Scott's policies aren't the reason for the drop.
The real difference is Ivan Bates, and Scott's just trying to steal the credit I'd say in 10 months, Ivan Bates has done more to decrease that type of crime than Marilyn Mosby did in 8 years. And he's built a real partnership with the U.S. Attorney, Eric Barr. So now they're focusing on gangs, drugs, guns, and really making an impact.
Well, Richards went on to say that Scott's current policies are leading to an increase in other crimes.
New tonight, the U.S. Court of Appeals has ruled Maryland will not be able to enforce a law requiring people to get a license before they buy a handgun. Fox 45's Jeff Abel joins us live tonight with the latest details on this ruling. Jeff?
Gun rights advocates are calling this a huge victory for Marylanders. Earlier today, a federal appeals court overturned Maryland's strict regulations, which were approved back in 2016. They require anyone wanting to own a handgun in Maryland to first undergo a background check and a 4-hour gun safety course along with fingerprinting, and then wait up to 30 days before getting a gun and it's approved. The appeals court ruled that the requirements violate the Second Amendment, writing that the law does not prohibit owners from owning handguns at some time in the future, but it still prohibits them from owning handguns now. In Annapolis, politicians today have been quick to react. In a statement, Senate President Bill Ferguson wrote this decision will unequivocally lead to more gun violence and firearm-related deaths. In a statement released moments ago, Mayor Brandon Scott wrote, in a time when the proliferation of firearms is threatening the safety of our communities, we should be more, not less careful about who has access to these tools of violence. And moments ago, we spoke with Republican State Delegate Robin Grammer.
This isn't a matter of the Supreme Court, which many people view as a conservative court at the moment. This isn't an issue of the Supreme Court making a conservative ruling. This is an issue of liberal courts making, frankly, just fair contextual rulings about firearm ownership and what is a crime and what's not a crime.
It is still unclear tonight whether the state plans to appeal this latest ruling. We're live tonight. Jeff Abel, Fox 45 News.
Jeff, thank you. As the federal investigation involving Safe Streets employees continues, Fox 45 News is committed to digging into the violence intervention effort. Mackenzie Frost is questioning city leaders about events held by Safe Streets and when there will be more transparency provided to the public.
On social media, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement promoting several Safe Streets events, including this expungement clinic held here at the Belvedere Safe Streets location off Park Heights Avenue. The flyer says the event lasting from 3 to 6 in the afternoon. But when Fox 45's photographer showed up around 4:30, the door was locked. Monzi completely ignoring our questions about the event. The apparent lack of event, despite being advertised, isn't the only thing we've reached out to Monzi asking questions about. The city's online map showing where the Safe Street zones are and each location. The map lists the Franklin Square location at 5 North Calhoun Street. So we went to that spot. We found a building seemingly under construction. No signs of Safe Streets. Monzi again ignoring our questions about the location of this site. And that brings us here to the whiteboards. We know the feds are investigating at least one Safe Streets location and at least one employee. We know we've been sending several questions to the mayor and his administration asking things like, will you release the names of the Safe Streets workers? Mayor Brandon Scott often says no. Will you launch an investigation into all the Safe Streets sites? Again, the mayor says the current federal investigation is isolated to just one location and one employee right now. So he says more investigations aren't necessary. So now we have some new questions for the mayor and for Monzi about the Safe Streets program. According to the contracts the city has with the two nonprofits, those organizations are supposed to cover the cost for the background checks for Safe Streets employees. But we have documentation showing that the nonprofits are seeking reimbursement from the city for those background checks. So we want to know who's actually responsible for covering the cost of the background checks for the Safe Streets employees. And that raises questions about an audit. Some members of the city's audit commission have told us that they support an audit of Monzi. And we asked Mayor Brandon Scott about it recently. Here's what he said.
Talk to the comptroller. We're open for any audit and we'll be working with him first because that is what the people of Baltimore have voted by charter to have the city comptroller of Baltimore City duly elected by the residents to do that job. And we know he's a fabulous comptroller and he'll do that.
So if the state auditors were to say they wanted to do it, would you support that?
I just answered that question. City first, and then if the state wants to step in and do that, they can have at it. We're not hiding anything, and we know that the organizations that we work with, LifeBridge and others, who have audits of their own, they're not hiding anything either.
So as we continue to dig into the inner workings of the Safe Streets program, we need help from you. If you have any information about this program that you think I need to know about, send it to me directly. safestreetstips@gmail.com. Meanwhile, we'll continue to demand answers from Mayor Brandon Scott and his administration about the Safe Streets program. At the Accountability Desk, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
That brings us to our question of the day. Do you think the Safe Streets program needs to be paused until the public learns more about the organization? That poll just opened. To make your voice heard, head to foxbaltimore.com.
Well, we are getting just absolutely hammered with rain right now. We've got plenty of showers coming down the area. And some of those are heavy at times, just a soaker this afternoon for holiday travel, as well as getting on home from work potentially. You see here right around Eldersburg, Cockeysville, Columbia. There's plenty of heavy rain there. Back off to Towson. Some pretty good rain also coming down right now. Let's take a little zoom up toward Bel Air as well as Aberdeen, Elkton. There's some heavy rain there in the yellow. Back to Chestertown. Some of the yellows mean some heavy rain. And back to Laurel as well. And it looks like things aren't really going to be changing very much over the next couple of hours. There's more rain that's moving in from the west, and some of that even heavier than what we're seeing right now. So let's go ahead and take a look at the travel forecast. Well, today, yeah, it's that throwaway day. You see the yellow. Really, we're the only part of the country except the extreme northwestern portion of the Pacific Northwest getting inclement weather up and down the East Coast. Man, the severe weather, snow to our north up into New York and New England. Of course, the soaking rain for us in time for pre-Thanksgiving travels tomorrow. Another busy travel day, probably the busiest travel day of the year. Look at that, green, looking great here in Baltimore. And the only problem spots way deep south in Texas, way up in New England, and even worse as you head into the Intermountain West on Thanksgiving if you're making travels out that way. But here, up and down most of the East Coast, all in the green. So things will be improving travel-wise. I'm going to let you know when the rain finally gets out for us, hour by hour. We take a look at the latest computer models coming in and my Weather Authority forecast in a couple of minutes.
Jonathan, thanks. Still ahead tonight, a debate over wages for restaurant workers, the new changes that could be coming to Baltimore, and why some argue it'll hurt local businesses.
I'm Atrell Nashar with what we're learning about a pending deal to release dozens of hostages held by Hamas, potentially including a 3-year-old American girl.
Israeli forces continue to press forward in Gaza, causing the front line of the war to shift. The Israeli military says it was able to gain control over Gaza City faster than anticipated. Hamas has now been forced to regroup in a complex of concrete buildings just east of the city. Israeli forces are following close behind, preparing for a major offensive. Now, the battlefield shift comes as negotiators inch toward a deal that would see the release of dozens of hostages in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has details.
The world is waiting for confirmation from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that his government has agreed to a deal with Hamas to release some of their hostages, likely women and children, a group that may include 3-year-old Abigail Idan, who has both American and Israeli citizenship.
When I think about that on Friday is Abigail's 4th birthday, and that she should be home with her family and with her sister and brother, and she isn't right now.
All of this comes as the Israeli government faces growing calls for accountability. On Monday, families of the hostages expressed frustration about a lack of information and access to officials.
I do expect them to be transparent as much as possible,
urging leaders at the Knesset to prioritize rescuing hostages over talks of executing members of Hamas.
Maybe instead of talking about the dead, talk about the living. Stop talking about killing Arabs. Talk about saving Jews.
Israel also under pressure to provide proof the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza was being used by Hamas as a base. The IDF releasing video it says shows their interrogation of Hamas fighters admitting to the group's activity in the hospital.
My sister was re-kidnapped and now...
There are still so many unknowns, like the condition of the hostages. The White House saying this Monday.
It has been difficult to get any great detail on every single hostage, where they are, how they are.
And what hope is left for the roughly 190 hostages who are not expected to be released in an imminent deal. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar reporting.
We remain under weather alert for the rest of the afternoon commute into early evening because of what you see here on the HD radar. Our latest weather maker moving through, and there's plenty of rain. Westminster, Eldersburg, Cockeysville, even the west side of the Beltway just getting hammered with heavy rain, yellows and oranges. And to add insult to injury, one of the busiest travel days of the year pre-Thanksgiving. And on top of that, we're in the heart of our afternoon commute. So this is about as bad as things get, right? You see heavy rain, again, moving in north and west of Baltimore. Here in Baltimore, some steady rain coming down, lightens up a little bit onto the eastern shore. And as you head up into Harford County, up 95, not quite as bad there into the northern eastern shore. And then it gets real heavy up into Pennsylvania and even mixes with some ice and potential wet snow over the highest ridge tops of PA, West Virginia, and even had some freezing rain going on in Garrett County in western Maryland up Deep Creek Lakeway. So, yeah, if you have travels out west into this evening, could have some icy patches left over there. And then if you go far enough north and east, we get into snow and ice in New York, as well as New England. If you have travels up that way, and all these purples, these are winter weather advisories that are in effect into this evening across Vermont, New Hampshire, up into Maine. So this latest weather maker, we're on the warmer side of it, if you wouldn't believe it. Yes, it is all rain here, and it's heavy rain. Big tropical moisture feed continues on the southern end of that. There's been a big severe weather outbreak. Georgia into especially Alabama, Mississippi, drying out behind all this. So look at this for tomorrow. Tonight, not so good. But by tomorrow morning, this stuff's east. And I think tomorrow afternoon is pretty nice, although it's going to be a little breezy. We'll have sunshine and high temperatures getting into the low 60s, perhaps. 52 right now. Some fog, some rain coming down on the Toyota Eastern Harbor Skycam. Winds out of the east and southeast at about 16 miles an hour. So it's a wind-driven rain and a heavy one at that into this evening. Look at this, 8:15, the yellows, the oranges, the reds, not a whole lot of changes through 11:45. Could even have a rumble of thunder, wouldn't surprise me. By about 6 a.m. as you follow the clock, look at that, finally, the stuff moves east, and tomorrow, sitting pretty here in the upper 50s and low 60s. There will be some breezes, mix of clouds and sun, and even Thanksgiving, not a bad looking day. So in total, we'll see anywhere between 1 to 2, locally 3 inches of rain coming out of our computer model here. 7-day forecast. Breezy for tomorrow. That early shower chance, that'll be pre-dawn likely. 57 and sun for Thursday. Cool down into the weekend, but no rain or anything else. Could see some showers into early next week, though, on Monday. And by the way, coastal flood warning. Southern Baltimore County, Baltimore City as well as Anne Arundel County, especially Annapolis, Fells Point, Bowlees. Could see some moderate flooding potentially as we head into tonight. Sandbagging likely going to be underway.
Jonathan, thank you. Still ahead tonight, balancing the Baltimore City budget, the programs in question, and how it could impact taxpayers. But first, President Biden focusing his efforts on combating the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. The calls now to Congress. Police in Beaver Creek, Ohio, have released an officer's body-worn camera video after a mass shooting inside a Walmart. The suspect was found dead in the store's vision center from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigators say the suspect is 20-year-old Benjamin Charles Jones of Dayton. He's accused of shooting 4 shoppers throughout the store before turning the gun on himself. Each victim survived, and their conditions are improving. The FBI is investigating his background and working to understand his motive. President Biden assembles his team to discuss strategy when it comes to curbing the movement of fentanyl into the U.S. The synthetic opioid is an often deadly drug responsible for a surge in deaths across the nation. Fentanyl is heavily trafficked across the southern border, with many of the drugs originating in China. President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping discussed cooperation in battling fentanyl in their face-to-face meeting last week in San Francisco.
I call this meeting to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep building on the momentum of last week. How can we accelerate our efforts and make sure that we're delivering real results for the people that are being hurt so badly?
President Biden is calling on Congress to pass his supplemental budget request for resources to curb the flow of fentanyl. He also wants the legislative branch to make fentanyl a Schedule I drug to limit its distribution. Coming up after the break, analyzing the crime crisis in Baltimore City, why critics argue real change could take years.
I'm Kayla Gaskins. Coming up, how citizens are holding officials accountable for rising crime.
Fox 45 News is following three big stories for you at 5:30.
Restaurant workers in Baltimore City could soon receive minimum wage. Why some argue it will hurt businesses as well as the workers.
The city program is meant to help those residents in need are under the microscope. How much they're costing you, the taxpayer.
Plus, Mayor Scott touting a reduction in homicides this year, but what is the reason behind the drop? Fox 45 News taking a closer look at the current policies.
We have team coverage diving into all angles of our top stories.
Let's start with Fox 45's Amy Simpson and the battle over wages for tipped restaurant workers. Amy joins us live now with a growing concern. Amy.
Yes, so this similar initiative called Initiative 82 just went into effect in D.C. earlier this year. But some say it's too early to tell the real impact. Now, Initiative 82 was passed in D.C. 1 year ago, going into effect in May. It's part of a nationwide movement to raise the minimum wage for tipped restaurant workers. And so far, there are conflicting views on its impact for servers, bartenders, and customers.
The tipping system works well for them. The current model is not broken. Don't try and fix it. And especially now, don't try and fix it and take us down the path of what's happening in Washington, D.C., where restaurants are moving away from tips to these mandatory service charges that the guests don't like and the workers don't like either.
If the opposition is going to say that, things have failed and everything is horrible, the data shows the opposite. So we are not claiming that because of I-82, wages have gone up, tips have gone up, but we are saying the data is very clear that the industry has not failed.
Now, you just heard from the president of a group called One Fair Wage. One Fair Wage is involved in efforts to change the pay model for restaurant workers here in Baltimore City. And they have an online event indicating that they'll be at City Hall rallying on December 6th for this cause, looking to raise pay here in the city for tipped workers. But City Council's agenda for December 6th has yet to reflect a bill proposal on this issue. Meanwhile, similar legislative efforts about attempts to raise the minimum wage for tipped workers in both Montgomery and Prince George's County have been underway in recent months, and they've been met with strong opposition, I'm told, from workers, servers and bartenders at restaurants. Reporting live tonight, Amy Simpson, Fox 45 News.
Amy, thank you. Well, new tonight, as Baltimore City struggles to balance its budget, more financial assistance programs are being offered than ever before. Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor has more on how the city's significant spending will eventually cost you.
What's free for a select few likely isn't free for you. Baltimore City's current administration rolling out a slew of new assistance programs promoted as offering financial aid to those in need. The new programs ranging from basic essentials, including rent, water, gas, and electric, to internet service subsidies and free name brand shoes.
Just because a program is helping someone doesn't mean money isn't being wasted. There still should be transparency and oversight to make sure that the money is being spent wisely.
A Fox 45 investigation revealing Mayor Brandon Scott's Safe Streets program spending thousands of dollars on sneakers this year, sparking calls for an audit of the agency's finances.
There are obviously questionable items on the list that taxpayers shouldn't be paying for. They shouldn't be paying for sneakers. That's an easy one to get rid of.
But by far the most expensive and controversial program, Mayor Scott's Baltimore Young Family Success Fund, selecting 200 young parents to receive unconditional cash payments of $1,000 every month for 2 straight years.
There have been mixed results about this kind of program across the country.
According to taxpayer advocate David Williams, many of the programs are difficult to monitor and the results are even harder to measure.
A, it's really difficult to track the money and where the families are spending the money. And B, there's really no consistent track record of these programs working for people.
With so many new fiscal breaks being introduced, in just 1 year, a massive bill is built.
This affects taxpayers at a very deep level, especially considering that the city just announced that they may have a $100 million structural deficit starting next year.
Costs taxpayers will be asked to foot as the city struggles to balance its budget. Rebecca Pryor.
That's why every single expenditure needs to be scrutinized.
Fox 45 News.
Mayor Brandon Scott is touting this year's drop in murders in Baltimore City as part of his leadership. He promised to reduce homicides by 15% each year of his term. While the city could meet that goal this year, Baltimore surpassed 300 homicides each year of his first 2 years. Now, one expert we spoke with say there's still much more that needs to be done in order for residents to feel safe. Fox 45's Tom Rogers explains.
Baltimore City's homicide and shooting numbers are down compared to last year and should remain below 300 murders for the first time in 9 years. However, many residents tell us they do not feel safe and point to out-of-control youth contributing to a huge spike in robberies and car thefts. Crisis leadership expert with the Falston Group, Rob Weinhold, says keeping the murders low is a great data point, but there is a lot more to changing the perception of fear in Baltimore, and it could take years.
If you think about fear, why it's important is it drives behavior, fear of judgment, fear of lack, fear of losing your life, right? And so people make their decisions where they live, where they send their kids to school, where they work, where they spend their discretionary time and money. And so there's a real impact to the city of Baltimore, and frankly, anywhere there's a high crime rate. And so in the law enforcement circles, typically it's thought of that fear of crime lags generally a year to 5 years behind crime itself. So you could have a downward turn, but people are still afraid. And I guess the best analogy for that is, shark attacks, right? If you go to the beach and there's a shark attack 1 week, the next week, the third week, everybody's scared, and they're scared for a long period of time. So there's a lag that everybody needs to think about, and you need to address the fear because it's critically important to the quality of life and the community feel that a jurisdiction has.
Weinhold went on to say, while the lowering of shootings and homicides is very important data point to be addressing, he hopes continues to remain low. It is addressing all the robberies, auto thefts, larceny, and property crimes that almost equally impact the quality of life. Tom Rogers, Fox 45 News.
As violent crime decreases nationwide, it is doing the opposite in California. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins reports citizens there are looking to hold someone responsible.
Communities fed up with rising crime are pointing fingers at progressive district attorneys who often opt for lighter sentences and less jail time for criminals.
My concern is public safety.
According to FBI crime data, California's violent crime rate is 31% higher than the national average. In Alameda County, residents now pushing to recall their progressive prosecutor, Pamela Price. The recall effort reportedly close to getting the number of signatures needed to move forward.
Anybody could be a victim at any time. Business owners are losing their businesses. People are losing their lives. And we continue to not see it as important.
LA's progressive prosecutor George Gascon dodged 2 similar recall efforts in the last 2 years. San Franciscans removed their progressive DA, Chesa Boudin, last summer. Boudin, Gascon, and Price all received backing from groups tied to the far-left activist billionaire megadonor George Soros.
Soros realized that you don't actually need to change the laws, you just need to change how they're enforced.
Soros tends to focus on smaller races where donations can have a big impact.
One of the things he noticed was that that the value for money in local races is much higher than it is in national races.
It's an effective strategy. In 2022, 1 in 5 Americans were represented by a Soros-linked DA, according to data compiled by the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Aside from recalling DAs, citizens taking their frustrations to city council races. In Seattle, only 3 of 9 city council members who led the 2020 Defund the Police movement were voted back into office.
Leaders of the group pushing for a recall of Alameda County's progressive DA say they'll be visiting Washington, D.C. next month to meet with the Biden administration. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
The Baltimore Banner is outlining Baltimore Councilman Zeke Cohen's consulting work with Open Society Foundations, which was funded by George Soros in 1979. On his 2022 ethics disclosure form, Cohen says he helps leaders create plans to implement trauma-informed care. He says his consulting work is done in cities outside of Baltimore. Taxpayer watchdog David Williams weighs in.
This is something voters should pay very close attention to. Very curious to see Zeke have these 2 different lives play out.
This isn't the first time Soros has been involved with elected leaders in Baltimore. In 2019, then City State Attorney Marilyn Mosby went to Portugal with a group that has received millions of dollars from Open Society. When she returned, she announced she would no longer prosecute low-level drug possession crimes. Cohen tells Fox 45 News he stands by his work, saying his experience has allowed him to learn what other places are doing to address mental health issues and bring that knowledge back to Baltimore.
Well, taking a live look around our region tonight as thousands of Marylanders hit the road for Thanksgiving. Right now, you're looking at the traffic conditions near the Harbor Tunnel, our weather radar, and the Chevy Storm Tracker driving through parts of our region.
That's right. Fox 45 News is on weather alert as we continue to look at rain issues right now. Mary, I always like Jonathan's line, and Jonathan, I'm going to give you credit for this. Jonathan says we always need rain, just not all at once.
Yeah, not all at once.
That's true. That is true. And we're getting it today.
The timing's not the best, right?
Bad, yes.
right prior to Thanksgiving. It could have happened like a week ago, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, we'll take it when Mother Nature gives it. We got a moderate drought that's been in place for the past week or so. So we really have some, or have had up until today, some worsening drying conditions. And if we didn't get this rain, it could have meant some problems. So, hey, guess we'll take what we can get while we can get it. But again, if you do have any travels this evening, it's going to be problematic for you. If you can kind of build around this for your holiday travel plans, that's going to be your best bet. Notice around Bel Air to Johnstown, Aberdeen, you're seeing some pretty good returns on the radar in the reds, the yellows, the oranges. That's some hefty rain that's coming down right now, and it looks like that's going to be the case for a lot of places as you work through the remainder of the evening because there's a lot of yellow and orange out toward Hagerstown, Green Valley, Martinsburg, and West Virginia. that is going to displace all of the lighter greens that are now in place for us, for much of our neighborhood. So